Okay, so then I guess continuing on, in brief, I stayed with the Mystic. I paid what I could when I could, but I also mainly did a lot of housework or cooking, which eventually came to a point where one of the housemates felt this isn't a contribution to them because they weren't eating the meals or home most of the time. But it was a big house of like 7 to 9 people, depending on the time. So it was something that was a struggle for multiple housemates. Some were like not paying or barely paying, but doing a lot of contribution to the community, whereas others were paying, or others, and some felt it wasn't useful because they weren't around, to them at least at that time. So things continued until about March. We went on a house trip and I got off crutches. I'd been on crutches for a little bit. A lot happened in between here and now. But basically, Zachy wanted me to get a job, one of the housemates, the one that wasn't okay with contributions. And in the end, I was in Zion and I decided to stay. And so that morning, when Brendan and David were leaving and the rest had already left, I was with Kenna and Shermy, who were going to allow me to stay the first few days because it was going to freeze. They didn't want me out in a tent. So I was staying with them for a few days. Everyone went into the chocolate shop because they were leaving. And I stayed in Shermy's truck with Shermy, and I think Kenna was in there. And then suddenly, Brendan and David come running back saying, Shannon, we got a job for you, we got a job. And I guess the chocolate shop had just shouted out, does anyone want a job? And I had been making chocolates and sweet desserts and cooking for the household and loved it. And so I got hired at the chocolate shop and I started working in Springdale. Brendan gave me $400 to start up living in Utah, which I can't. It was so beautiful. It was just so kind. And so I started working at the chocolate shop. The plan was that likely in July I would be going down to Ojai. And so there was this whole, do I keep tenting or do I get a house? Do I get a roof? But I continued working full time. I stayed with Shermy and Kenna for 4 days, and I had gotten sick at that point, and they didn't want me sleeping out, so I stayed with Brian, who is Shermy's lover. And they had an extra bedroom, so I stayed there, completing my first 2 weeks. I was hospitalized, and then I continued working and ended up tenting inside of Zion for most of the rest of my time. And I was feeling like a lot of why I had stayed there, I hadn't even gotten to explore the park, and I hadn't really gotten a real day off. My days off ended up being the days that I had to call in sick. And then the next time it was spent gathering materials to move. And so I hadn't even gotten to explore where I was living, and I'm literally living in a national park. So I stayed and I left, I decided to quit. But before I had said anything or could say anything, I was going to put in a 2 weeks notice. And my boss started touching me that night. And so then, oh, sorry. I have to do this video. And then I guess from there, I didn't really know what was happening. So I went in, they used like income and stuff before I had even gone in. And I already knew like it was going to be raining and potentially thunderstorms the next day. I was going to maybe have to cancel my hike. That this was already my day off, and they'd asked me to come in. Now they were asking me to come in again, and they used, well, I thought you needed money. So I basically like said, oh. And so that night they started touching me in the car, and I really didn't, I was so lost, like confused, like, anyway, I went into work the next day and just like kept my head down the whole time. Like I found anything that I couldn't find before, like even like I couldn't find the butterscotch candy for a month, and that day I found it. But I left, and so, well, the next day I talked to a coworker and confirmed some things, and they had me stay the night, and then I left work the middle of the next day. And so I was going to stay with Lainey's family, my friend, coworker who I was working with. And then without me asking, Brendan volunteered to drive the next morning and come pick me up. So then I went down to Ojai, and the Krishnamurti Foundation, where Brendan was an intern student and working, allowed me to stay until we got back up to Davis for Fireworks Festival. In the end, a lot of things changed, and suddenly I was in Davis, and I just like stayed. At some point, like I was with the Mystic for a little while. Things were going really bad. They offered me my room back for $250 a month, which of course was like $200 or $250, and I definitely took that. And then I moved in like 3 days down to Ojai, where I started nannying for a family with a 2.5-year-old, Maxwell. And that lasted till September. And this whole time there was a lot of drama going on, a lot of pressure to talk to my parents, like especially now I was, just the city over, and my parents wanted to talk to me, my friends.